Chapter 3. Spiritism and Hypnotism. I have now briefly reviewed a few of the leading arguments upon which the Christian world has built its hopes of a future life. I have endeavored to show why it is that none of them are convincing to the minds of those who are accustomed to the methods of reasoning which are applied to the solution of the problems of the material universe. It has been shown that no one has attempted to apply the processes of induction to the solution of the great problem, and for the very good reason that, outside of biblical records, no facts have been adduced, no phenomena have been observed by the writers on the subject of a future life, upon which immortality for mankind can be legitimately predicated. We now approach a field of observation, however, which bristles with facts and phenomena which millions of our race believe to be demonstrative of a life beyond the grave. It is unnecessary to say that I allude to the phenomena of so-called Spiritism. It has been customary for the Christian Church to ignore the claims of Spiritists to recognition as fellow workers in the realm of spiritual philosophy. It has derided their pretensions to an experimental knowledge of the truth of one of the essential doctrines of the Christian Church, namely, the doctrine of immortal life. It has persistently denied the genuineness of their phenomena, or were compelled to admit the verity of the manifestations, which differ in no essential particular from those recorded in Holy Writ. It has attributed them to diabolical agency. Scientists, until within a very few years, have been content with a general denial of the existence of the phenomena, and a disdainful refusal to investigate. Their attitude is identical with that of one of their number, who, when called upon to explain the phenomenon of the fall of meteoric stones, exclaimed, "There are no stones in the air, therefore no stones fall from the air." The materialistic scientist says, "There are no spirits, therefore there are no spiritistic phenomena." Happily for mankind, and much to the credit of a vast number of consistent members of the Christian Church, as well as of thousands of the ablest scientists in the civilized world, this attitude is no longer popular, but is fast giving way to one of intelligent and honest investigation. This change is largely due to the London Society for Psychical Research, which comprises among its members a large number of scientists whose reputation as careful investigators in the realm of natural science is international. The result is that there is no longer a rational doubt of the genuineness of so-called spiritistic phenomena among those who have taken the trouble to apply the strict rules of scientific inquiry to the subject matter. They declare that no phenomenon in the realm of physical science is better authenticated than those of so-called Spiritism. This being true, it follows that the causes must be investigated with the same care and in the same spirit of candor that has characterized the investigation of the fact. And to that end, the millions of human beings who have claimed a supramundane origin for the phenomena are entitled to a respectful hearing. For, if their hypothesis is demonstrably true, the question of spirit life is no longer a speculative problem, and if it is not true, it is important that the world should know to what power or law of nature the phenomena are to be attributed. In dealing with the phenomena under consideration, I do not propose to waste the time of the reader by the discussion of each particular phase of manifestation. A volume of the size of this would be all too small to discuss exhaustively the many-sided problem or to explain the various characteristics of the phenomena. Besides, it would be but a repetition of what I have already done in another work. It will only be necessary here to discuss the one salient feature which is common to all the phenomena, and that is the intelligence which is manifested. This intelligence claims to be from the denizens of another world, and Spiritists hold that there is indubitable evidence in the manifestations themselves that they proceed from spirits of the dead. It will, however, be necessary to discuss the subject of Spiritism at some length, for the reason that in the consideration of scientific problems it is of the very first importance that the phenomena under consideration should be properly classified. There are two hypotheses employed to account for so-called spiritistic phenomena. One is that they proceed from disembodied spirits, and the other is that they are produced by the conscious or unconscious exercise of powers inherent in the living man, and that the known powers of the embodied human soul are sufficient to account for all that is mysterious in the phenomena. Both these hypotheses cannot be true. One must be true and the other false. There can be no compromise, as some spiritists would have us believe. They are not concurrent hypotheses. They are absolutely antagonistic. Hence the importance of properly classifying the phenomena at the threshold of our argument. For if it is found that they are produced by the living, then we have a solid basis of fact from which we can deduce the most momentous conclusions regarding the destiny of man. But if it can be demonstrated that the whole or any part of spiritistic phenomena are produced by disembodied spirits, the whole subject is thrown into logical chaos. For a future life for man is not demonstrated by showing that spirits communicate with the living, for the very obvious reason that we still have no means of determining whether any communicating spirit is that of one who has once lived upon the earth, or is an evil spirit, or an elemental, or an elementary, or a devil, or any other of the denizens of the other world with which it has been peopled by superstition. It is well known to all observers of spiritistic phenomena that the one essential prerequisite to their production is the presence of a so-called medium. The term medium has been bestowed upon those who were instrumental in the production of the phenomena, because of the assumption that the intelligence conveyed is from spirits of the dead to the living. The instrument through which these messages are conveyed is, therefore, designated as a medium. This term, consequently, implies a theory of causation, and as it is better to avoid giving an implied assent to any theory by the employment of a careless terminology, I shall hereinafter employ the more noncommittal term of psychic to designate the person in whose presence these manifestations occur. The psychic is usually seated at a table around which several others are gathered, and the collective company is designated as a circle. After all are seated and quiet is secured, the psychic enters into a state which may be described by the generic term of trance. This state, it may be premised, is identical with that of hypnosis, and it varies in depth from that of an apparently normal condition to that of profound objective insensibility. This condition is self-induced, and during its continuance various phenomena are produced, though each psychic is usually confined to one class of manifestations. In the presence of some psychics, percussive sounds are heard, called spirit raps. These are sometimes heard on the table, at other times on the floor, or on the walls, ceiling, or furniture of the room. In presence of other psychics, the table is tilted, and oftentimes it levitates into the air without physical contact with anyone. Some psychics write automatically, that is, they seize a pencil and write, their hands seemingly being moved by an extraneous force which acts independently of the conscious volition of the psychic. It would be tedious even to enumerate the different forms which these manifestations assume, and it would be foreign to my purpose to do so. But there is one characteristic common to all the phenomena. They all manifest intelligence, and this intelligence is almost invariably exercised independently of the conscious volition of the psychic. If the psychic is what is known as a writing medium, messages will be written purporting to emanate from spirits of the dead, and the information conveyed will often transcend the conscious knowledge of the psychic. And sometimes the messages will convey information not in the conscious possession either of the psychic or of anyone else in the room. So perfect is the automatism of some psychics that they will write long messages, characterized by more than ordinary intelligence and by perfect coherency, and at the same time carry on an animated conversation with others in the room, and on a subject entirely foreign to that of the message which they are writing. Others have been known to write normally on one subject with the right hand, while at the same time the left was automatically writing a message on another subject, the latter purporting to emanate from the spirit of someone who is dead. In fact, the intellectual feats performed by some psychics almost transcend belief, and, were they not abundantly authenticated by the most severe scientific tests, would be unworthy of credence. As it is, they demand investigation by the strictest rules of logical induction, with the view of testing the validity of the hypothesis that they are of supramundane origin. In doing so, we should always bear in mind the fundamental axiom of science that we have neither occasion nor logical right to attribute any phenomenon to supramundane agency if it is explicable by reference to natural laws. On the other hand, if they cannot be thus explained, those who hold to the supramundane explanation have a right to demand that their hypothesis shall be provisionally accepted. A fact is a fact, and a psychic fact is just as much a fact as a waxing and waning moon. Science has no more right to ignore the one than the other. No fact in nature can safely be ignored, for no fact is wholly insignificant. Each is so inseparably bound up with the others that if even the most apparently unimportant fact is left out of consideration, inextricable confusion is likely to follow. An apparently insignificant fact is like a cipher in arithmetic. Separately considered, it has no value, but in its proper place it increases the value of the other figures tenfold. Drop one out at any given point, and the whole calculation results in a wrong conclusion. This is why the old psychology is incomplete, confused, and unsatisfactory. It was built up on a basis of speculative philosophy and, necessarily, in utter ignorance of a vast array of psychic facts and principles which have transpired and been discovered within the last quarter of the 19th century. It is the same with speculative theology. Never, before the development of experimental psychology, has it been possible to demonstrate, with anything like scientific accuracy, the fact that man has a soul. With the advent, however, of hypnotism, mesmerism, and cognate psychic phenomena, all has been changed, and it is now possible to demonstrate the truth of many propositions that have heretofore lain wholly in the realm of speculative philosophy, or have been relegated by the scientific world to the domain of superstition. New discoveries are constantly being made in the psychic world, discoveries which promise soon to place psychology fairly within the domain of the exact sciences. Then will man, in the truest sense, be enabled to look through nature up to nature's God, not by means of vain analogies drawn from the realm of gross material existence, but by studying his own powers and attributes. The divine pedigree of man and his title deed to immortal life are written upon the tablets of his own soul, and not upon the wings of the Lepidoptera. Experimental hypnotism demonstrates several important characteristics of man's mental organization which throw a flood of light upon many obscure problems of psychology. The first and most important of these characteristics is the fact that man possesses a dual mental organization. This is an old doctrine which has been held by speculative philosophers from Plato down to the present day, but it was never scientifically demonstrated until hypnotism revealed it as a law of the human intellect. When a person is perfectly hypnotized, his objective senses are put to sleep. He can neither hear, see, smell, taste, nor feel, except at the will of the hypnotist who induces the lethargy. At the bidding of the latter, however, the subject can be roused to a state of intense activity and power. His mind then seems to be completely transformed, and to possess powers and attributes which were entirely foreign to the subject in his normal condition. His memory is exalted, and in many cases it seems to be practically perfect. In many instances he develops the power of telepathy, that is, the power to read the mind of the operator or of anyone with whom he is in rapport. This is one of the most important things to be remembered in this connection. The power of reading the minds of those with whom the hypnotized are in mental contact with is the master key which unlocks many of the grand mysteries of psychic phenomena. That power, in connection with the perfection of his memory, constitutes a salient feature of the accomplishments of every well-developed psychic. There is, however, another characteristic of the psychic's mind when in the hypnotic or partially hypnotic state, which constitutes the greatest and most important discovery of modern experimental psychology. It is this: when hypnotized, the subject is constantly amenable to control by suggestion. That is to say, he accepts as absolutely true every statement that is made to him. Thus, if he is told that he is the President of the United States, he will immediately accept the statement as true, and assume all the airs of importance and dignity that he may conceive to be the legitimate concomitant of that more or less exalted position. If he is then told that he is a street mendicant, he will immediately change his demeanor and assume an attitude of humble suppliancy. In short, he may be made to believe that he is anything, animate or inanimate, and he will act the part suggested with wonderful fidelity to nature, just so far as his knowledge of the characteristics of the person or thing suggested extends. Thus, if it is suggested that he is someone of his intimate acquaintances, he will immediately proceed to imitate all the salient peculiarities of his friend in voice, tone, gesture, and favorite topics of conversation. Again, it may be suggested to him that he is the spirit of some deceased friend or acquaintance. It matters not. He will confidently believe the suggestion to be literally true, and will assume the characteristics of the deceased, and will, if interrogated, give a full account of his surroundings through the spirit world, albeit his account of his spirit abode will be in exact accordance with his own preconceived ideas on that subject. In other words, the suggestions embraced in his education will give character to his account of his imaginary spirit environment. These facts are well known to all hypnotists, and anyone familiar with the works of the mesmerists of the first half of the present century will recall 1,000 instances illustrating what has been said. Those works were written, and the experiments made, in utter ignorance of the inexorable law of suggestion, and, hence, many believed that the mesmerized subjects were actually in communication with the spirit world. One man devoted his life to hypnotizing people, sending them to the spirit land, and recording their accounts of what they saw. It is unnecessary to remark that his book was for many years a standard authority among spiritists, a book of reference, by consulting which all disputed questions relating to the topography, sociology, or climatology of the spirit world could be definitely settled. Again, it is well known to hypnotists that a suggestion to a subject that he is under the control of a spirit will result in the production of all the phenomena of spirit mediumship, limited only by his lack of training as a psychic. It is also well known that the quickest and surest way to train a psychic for spirit mediumship is to hypnotize him often enough to produce the requisite neurotic condition, accompanying each hypnotization with suggestions of spirit presence and spirit control. Other things being equal, the best psychics are those who have been developed by hypnotic processes. It is perfectly easy by suggestion to train a psychic to habits of self-hypnotization, and when that is accomplished, he is ready to enter the field as a full-fledged medium of communication between the two worlds. It is impossible within the space at my command to give even a resume of the many characteristics of the hypnotized subject which go to establish the fact of duality of mind. Nor does it matter, for the purposes of this discussion, whether we regard man as being possessed of two minds, each possessing independent powers and attributes, or regard as one mind as being possessed of certain diverse powers which manifest themselves differently under varying conditions. The fact remains, however, that everything happens just as though man were possessed of a dual mind, and we have a logical right, therefore, to assume it to be true as a provisional hypothesis. Besides, having fully discussed that question elsewhere, when I cannot, without unseemly repetition, discuss it exhaustively here, I have assumed, therefore, that man possesses a dual mind. For the sake of clearness, as well as for the want of a better term, I have designated one as the objective mind, and the other as the subjective mind. The objective mind takes cognizance of the objective world. Its media of observation are the five physical senses. The subjective mind takes cognizance of its environment by means independent of the physical senses. It perceives by intuition. It is there out of the emotions and the storehouse of memory. It performs its highest functions when the objective senses are in abeyance. In a word, it is that intelligence which makes itself manifest in a hypnotic subject when he is in a state of somnambulism. In adopting this terminology, I have merely followed that of Averroes, as given by Professor Draper in his Conflict Between Religion and Science, although the meaning which he attaches to his term, objective intellect, differs materially from that of my definition of the objective mind. His term, subjective intellect, is explained as follows: the individual, or passive, or subjective intellect is an emanation from the universal and constitutes what is termed the soul of man. This perfectly expresses my belief regarding the subjective mind. It not only possesses powers and functions which act independently of those of the objective mind, but its very manifestation shows it to be a distinct entity and apparently capable of maintaining existence independently of the body. It is a spark of the divine intelligence. It is the soul. I have now sufficiently enlarged upon the subject of the dual hypothesis to enable the intelligent reader to grasp my meaning. The law of suggestion has also been clearly explained. It has also been shown that telepathy, or mind reading, is a power of the hypnotized subject. The three propositions of my hypothesis, therefore, stand thus. 1. Man is possessed of a dual mind, objective and subjective. 2. The subjective mind is constantly amenable to control care by suggestion. 3. Telepathy is a power of the subjective mind. With these three fundamental propositions clearly before us, we are prepared intelligently to compare the phenomena of Spiritism with those of hypnotism, with the view of a candid inquiry whether there is any phenomenon produced by the one that cannot be reproduced by the other. Or, to put it in another form, is there anything in the phenomena of Spiritism that cannot be explained by reference to the known powers inherent in the living man as developed by and through the science of hypnotism? A brief comparison of the two classes of phenomena will make a prima facie case against the spiritistic hypothesis. It would, however, be more in accordance with the principles of logical scientific investigation to say that the spiritistic hypothesis is, prima facie, untrue. and that the onus probandi is upon those who claim a supermundane origin for any phenomenon whatever. But we will waive our logical rights for the moment and proceed to assume the burden of proof. In the first place, the condition of the psychic when producing spiritistic phenomena is identical with that of the hypnotized subject. The only difference between the two is not in the condition, but in the method of inducing the condition. Both are hypnotized, but the psychic is self-hypnotized by an autosuggestion, whereas the hypnotic subject is hypnotized by the suggestion of another. It is well known, however, that any hypnotic subject can easily be trained to hypnotize himself. When that is done, all the conditions requisite to successful mediumship are present in the hypnotic subject, and if he believes in Spiritism, the suggestion embraced in that belief will do the rest. It may be objected that the spiritistic psychic often produces his phenomena while apparently in his normal condition. To this it is answered that there are also an infinite number of degrees of hypnotism which shade into each other imperceptibly, ranging from the apparently normal state to that of profound hypnotic lethargy. Thus, Bernheim I was enabled to produce all suggestive phenomena up to hallucination, while the patient was in the waking condition, that is, in a condition that could not be distinguished from the normal by any ordinary tests. That the subject was actually hypnotized, however, was demonstrated by the very fact that he was controllable by suggestion. In one case, he produced such a perfect state of analgesia by mere suggestion, the patient being in the waking condition, that the application of Du Bois-Reymond's electrical apparatus, with the greatest current attainable turned on, produced no sensation whatever, although, as Bernheim remarks, the painful sensation thus produced is normally unbearable. It will thus be seen that the degree of hypnosis has no necessary effect upon the manifestations, either in hypnotism proper or in the psychic phenomena of Spiritism. Practice in each case seems to develop the suggestibility of the psychic and his consequent ability to produce the various phenomena while in a condition apparently closely approaching the normal. That the condition of the psychic and that of the hypnotic subject are identical is further demonstrated by the fact that they are governed by the same laws. The most important of these laws is that of suggestion, and all the facts of spiritistic phenomena show that the psychic is constantly dominated by that subtle power. His very entrance into the psychic state is produced by the suggestion embraced in his belief that he is about to pass under the control of an extraneous force which he believes to be a spirit. When he is thus self-hypnotized, he is necessarily amenable to the same power. This is clearly shown by the well-known fact that any spirit can then be invoked by those present, and one spirit will respond just as readily as another. Besides, the spirit carried a living man will respond with as much alacrity as that of a dead man, provided the question is asked in such a way as to cause the psychic to believe that the bearer of the name is dead. Moreover, the spirit of a purely imaginary person is just as responsive to an invocation as any other. The writer once attended a spiritistic stance presided over by an ignorant psychic. Someone asked for the spirit of Socrates, and the old philosopher promptly responded. His communication was couched in terms that were evidently intended to be somewhat lofty, and were so considered by the enthusiastic admirers of the psychic. Nor was their admiration at all diminished by the fact that Socrates seemed to labor under the impression that he was a Roman when on earth. This was afterwards explained by a prominent local authority in spirit philosophy by saying that those old spirits had reached an altitude so far removed from earthly life that they were no longer interested in mundane affairs, and many of them had really forgotten their earthly names and nationality. A wag who was present asked for a communication from the ancient Greek philosopher, Cantharides. This request was also promptly complied with in an equally lofty strain of bad English. When asked for a description of the latter personage, the psychic described an old man with long white hair, a flowing beard, and a very high forehead. This goes to show either that the psychic was dominated by an absurdly false suggestion, or that evolution is more rapid in the spirit land than it is here, for the description of the personality of Cantharides certainly did not suggest a coleopterous ancestry. To do the psychic entire justice, let me say that a circumstance like the foregoing does not, in the remotest degree, impugn his honesty or sincerity. He is in a hypnotic condition. Being in that state, he is necessarily dominated by the laws pertaining to it. His normal reason is in abeyance. His subjective mind is active, and the one all-potent, never-failing law of subjective mental activity is the law of suggestion. Like every other law of nature, there are no exceptions to its inexorable rules. He believes, because he must believe, every suggestion made to him. The suggestion enforced by the current theory of Spiritism convinces him that he is a chosen medium of spirit communication with the inhabitants of this world. His reason confirms the belief, for he finds himself dominated by what he believes to be an extraneous force which seems to act independently of his conscious volition. This force is found to possess a remarkable intelligence. It will answer questions and write essays, poems, and polemics with equal facility, and it often imparts knowledge and divulges secrets of which he is not the conscious custodian. It gives information, which he knows he never could have possessed, concerning the affairs of his auditors, secrets, perhaps, which the latter declare could never have been known to any but themselves and some deceased friend. When the intelligence is interrogated, it declares itself to be the disembodied spirit of the friend who was the joint custodian of the sitter's secret. With all this array of evidence before him, not only of spirit presence but of spirit identity, what is his natural conclusion? He is not a scientist, and does not, therefore, know that it is unscientific to believe that man has a soul. He was taught at his mother's knee that he not only has a soul, but that it is destined to an immortal existence. He has never heard of the dual nature of the mind of man. He knows nothing of the law of suggestion, and telepathy is not in his vocabulary. But he has common sense, and he is not aware that it is unscientific to exercise it when dealing with phenomena which he cannot explain otherwise than as being tangible evidence of the truth of what he has always been taught to believe was the essence of the teachings of Holy Writ. And he does believe it, honestly and implicitly. It is henceforth his religion, his consolation in this life, and the sheet anchor of his faith in immortality. With all the evidence before him, and in the absence of any other rational explanation, he would be an unreasoning skeptic if he did not believe it. It will thus be seen what an all-potent suggestion dominates his subjective mind. By virtue of the fundamental law of its being, it must accept every suggestion imparted to it, however absurd or contrary to objective knowledge and experience. But when it is confirmed by objective reason and reinforced by the tenderest emotions and loftiest aspirations of the human soul, it becomes a dominant power which cannot be resisted. In this state of mind, objective and subjective, the suggestion that a spirit from another world is in possession of the psychic's hand and guiding its movements is, and must be, seized upon by his subjective mind and implicitly believed and acted upon. And the suggested spirit personated with all the preternatural acumen and dramatic circumstance characteristic of subjective mental activity. If it were not so, then there would be a break in the operations of a law of nature, an exception to the universal rule, which in itself would constitute a miracle as great as would be the suspension for a day of the law of gravitation. Another fact which correlates the phenomena produced by the spiritistic psychic with those of hypnotism is that the psychic in each case develops the power of telepathy, or mind reading. I shall not waste time in this connection by offering proofs of the reality of this power. That work has been most thoroughly done by the Society for Psychical Research. It is sufficient to say at this time that no law or power of nature has been more completely and scientifically demonstrated than has been the law of telepathy. There is, however, one important principle pertaining to the subject matter which must be understood before the full significance of the fact relating to it can be appreciated or comprehended. Telepathy is the means of communion between subjective minds. The objective mind does not necessarily participate in the communication. The message, in other words, is not necessarily on a subject of which either party is consciously thinking. It frequently has no connection whatever with the conscious thoughts of either of the participants in the production of the phenomena. A message of the utmost importance may, therefore, never rise above the threshold of the percipient's consciousness or even be consciously sent by the agent. It requires some degree of psychic development to enable one to become conscious of the reception of a telepathic message. Hence it is that comparatively few are able to perceive the details of a communication, although there are few who have not felt an unaccountable impression which is afterwards discovered to have a telepathic origin or is classed as a coincidence by the skeptical. It requires an extraordinary, even an abnormal development of psychic power to enable one consciously to read the thoughts of another in detail. That power is possessed by few outside the circle of so-called spirit mediums, and of those who have developed it by hypnotic processes for purposes of public exhibition. It is thought that enough has been said to correlate the phenomena of Spiritism with those of hypnotism, at least so far as the conditions necessary for the production of the two classes of phenomena are concerned. In the next chapter, the principles herein set forth will be applied to the elucidation of the phenomena alleged to be produced by disembodied spirits. I will also take occasion to answer some objections urged by scientific students of Spiritism who hold that there is still a small residuum of phenomena which is not explicable by reference to known laws of nature.